Thank you for having me. We'll see. I think they gave me 45 minutes to talk. We'll see how close I can come to that. Usually the only thing I talk for 45 minutes about is Ohio State football. So we'll see where trees rank in relation to the Buckeyes. So I think probably in this audience doesn't have to do too much time spent on the benefits of trees, but just to be safe, talk about some of the reasons why we're doing this project. And it's been probably a year and a half ago or so that UTC came and presented their study, their satellite study on the tree canopy of Chattanooga. And it was detailed and informative, but also kind of showed what we already know to a degree. It shows that, the slopes of Lookout Mountain and some of the parks in the city are green and the heavily developed areas are red. And I think that also points out that there are parts of the city that don't have trees, but we shouldn't necessarily think that's a bad thing. Like downtown's highly productive in an area where you won't ever have it green, and that's fine. But there's residential areas, like if you kind of look at like where Missionary Ridge is there, and to the east of that, Highland Park, Ridgedale, Glenwood, these kind of neighborhoods, like we could probably increase our tree canopy there. And here's a little diagram that I got from a friend who studied the tax, I think it's like tax revenue per acre. So it kind of interesting contrast to look at the red of this map, but then let's also not get confused about the areas are still really good and efficient. So urban heat island effect is a really main driver for this project. It's kind of obvious that when you have a lot of hard surfaces, asphalt, concrete, it's absorbing a lot of heat, it's radiating off. And so you get those days in July and August in the South where it's just like insufferably hot. So the more trees we can get in the ground, it's going to alleviate that stress. Stormwater is another big one. If anyone's ever been in a rainstorm and stood underneath a tree to get out of the rain, just multiply that times a million times over. And that's the effect that trees can have on reducing the load of water going in the stormwater system. So we would like to get more trees in there, capture all that water in their canopy. But it's all well and good. But the kind of, for me personally, the real inspiration for the project comes from a kind of a love and appreciation for beautiful walkable neighborhoods. And when I grew up in Northeast Ohio and kind of outside of a small town, and we had beautiful poplar trees, oaks, maples on our property, and it just must have left something in my mind. I just loved having these big, massive trees like overhead. And I remember like playing baseball, and you throw the ball up and like I couldn't even hit the bottom of the tree canopy because the trees were so high. And so that kind of left a mark on me. And here we go. So when I went to Ohio State, lived in Columbus for a while, there were some neighborhoods in the area where I lived that had just a fantastic tree canopy. And so that kind of left a mark. And then go to Brooklyn, New York, and similar thing. More urban environment, a lot denser, but just an amazing tree canopy going on there. Made for walkable streets. You had shade to walk in. And if you ever kind of question, like, well, that's all nice, but it's really important to contrast that with a moment of, if you're standing in the street, for example, here, and you're looking to the north, you see some trees on the right-hand side. There's a little parklet there, but otherwise the streetscape really doesn't have that many trees. And you turn around and you face the other way, and you have this tunnel of trees like going down the street, just creating this incredible environment. And there's a lot going on here. This is like a beautiful walkable neighborhood. There's a lot that goes on to making environments like this that we love and cherish. There's a lot of zoning involved. There's a lot of economic development that goes into this. There's a lot of public works. But there is one thing that we can all work on is tree canopy. So you go to a different part of Brooklyn, and here it's a great mix of street and yard trees. So it's not just all in the public realm where like the city forester is handling it, but there's also situations where you can have like detached single family homes that the trees on the private property can play a role in that public realm that creates a beautiful space for a neighborhood. Then you leave New York, you say, okay, let's go to Birmingham. Like they've got some great neighborhoods down there as well. And the Highland Park neighborhood of Birmingham, similar thing. You got some street trees and yard trees, just makes these beautiful walkable neighborhoods. And if anything, you need it more here in the South than anywhere, because it gets so blasted hot here in the July and in the heat. So making it so that you can actually walk down a street is so important to make these neighborhoods as walkable and livable as they should be. Asheville, also nearby, a city that a lot of people in Chattanooga like to parallel us to, that we aspire to be like. And you kind of actually get the sense of what it's like, what kind of effect these trees can have, even in the wintertime when there's no foliage on the leaves. Still creates a nice space. Those trees up against the street help to calm traffic and make it safer to walk down the sidewalks as well. So what do we have here in Chattanooga? We've got Fort Wood is a great neighborhood with a fantastic tree canopy. This is Oak Street, I believe, and then Vine Street as well through Fort Wood, and also again here a mix of street and yard trees that contribute to that great urban canopy. I moved here with my wife and family about 2.5 years ago, and did not take very long to kind of recognize and see that while Fort Wood's beautiful and has a lot of trees, there are a lot of neighborhoods in kind of old Chattanooga that are lacking in tree canopy. And landscape architects, I'm kind of in the world of trees, and kind of asked around, like, when I lived in Portland, there's this organization called Friends of Trees, big nonprofit. They started in late 1980s doing guerrilla tree plants. They just go around and like throw trees in the ground. They got formalized, and they've got full-time staff now, hundreds of volunteers, and over 30 some years, they planted almost 1 million trees. And so I thought, well, surely Chattanooga's big enough to have some kind of group like this planting trees. And it turned out the answer was no. There had been fits and starts of people planting trees, but no regular organization doing monthly plantings year after year. And I thought, well, at the same time, I moved to Chattanooga and I joined a small local Rotary club, the Nooga Night Rotary Club. And I thought, here's a club that we started in 2019, kind of like got kind of struggled through the pandemic, and then thought, well, here's a young club. We're looking for something to like sink our teeth into, I thought, well, maybe we can like combine these two things, like this thing I care a lot about and this club that needs like something to kind of bring it together and like kind of grow. And I thought, maybe this is something we could do together, and talk to some leadership in the club. It sounded like, yeah, absolutely. And then I thought, well, maybe it'll be hangups and liability and fundraising or whatever. And they're like, well, actually, no, we could do this pretty quick. We're having these conversations in early January of 2023. And they're like, well, the grant for district grant applications is the end of this month. So let's try and throw something together. So we got some club funds together, matched it with a district grant, threw together a rough plan, and off we were running. It's like, okay, we're going to make a plan for the next year, and we're going to try and plant some trees. So, it turned out to be something we could get started on pretty easily. And to be honest, that's a great thing about Rotary, is that it accelerated the process. Instead of, I don't know what may have held back other organizations, but you kind of think about, I want to do this thing. Do I need to start my own nonprofit? Do I need to like get a board and fundraise and make a business plan and stuff like that? And it's like, no, with Rotary, we just kind of like, we can cut through all that and get started right away and put a shovel in the ground. So that was pretty cool. Here's an example of some of the neighborhoods, that we kind of can see in Chattanooga that are lacking a little bit in tree canopy. And Hills, this is Southside, just a few blocks from here. Great neighborhood, but lacking in tree canopy. And to be quite honest, this is a great example of street, curb, sidewalk. There is no space in the public right of way. It's not like the city forester can come through here and actually plant any trees. Any trees that get planted here would be private property trees. So that's exactly where we can step in. We can engage with those homeowners and actually plant those trees to try and start to create those neighborhoods and those environments that we're trying to see. Hill City, another neighborhood that, again, not much right-of-way space here at all. Overhead wires. We could be planting trees on either side of the street in people's yards and whatever. Like, it would start to kind of create nicer areas. Highland Park, fantastic neighborhood. Again, plenty of right-of-way space here, but this is where city forestry stretch. They're planting trees, but they need help. Like, we can come in and try and like expedite the process a little bit. And take note of some of these images I'm showing you. These are examples, but also we might come back here. Glenwood, awesome neighborhood over kind of just up against Missionary Ridge. Ridgedale. Again, Ridgedale. And this is an image, keep this one in mind. So I thought that, our club could step in and help. We're Nooga Night Rotary Club. And so maybe, I'm going to guess we've got a few of our Rotarians here today. I'm going to guess like maybe a lot of you have heard of Rotary, may not have a good idea of what it is. So maybe just a little quick bio on like what Rotary is. And it's an international service organization that, every small town and every city across the country probably has a Rotary Club. And but it's not just across our country, it's around the world. There's 1.4 million members around the world. And these clubs operate, they operate with projects both locally and within our district and even internationally. So there's some projects, for example, we're a Nooga Night Rotary Club. We're not yet our own charter. We're sponsored by or satellited by the Chattanooga Breakfast Club. They meet and so they've got some projects they've done. The Rivermont Playground, if you've ever been up on North Shore, they built that entire playground up there, an inclusive playground. And that was a project they did within. They did a lot of the fundraising themselves, worked with Play Corps about getting a lot of stuff donated, and built that playground with our own labor and volunteers. So that's an example of doing a project. Someone within the club had an idea, saw a gap, like, hey, we should work with the school. Historically has disabled children. Let's do a playground here. Also, the Chattanooga Breakfast Club does work in Haiti. So they do some international work. They'll go down there and help them work on well water for drinking water for small villages. Our club, the Nooga Night Rotary Club, and getting started, we previously have done, we'll go for hikes on Saturday morning, do trash pickup. This is one we did at Booker T. Washington just about a year ago, actually. We've volunteered out at McCamey, and we meet twice a month right now, the second and fourth Tuesday of the month at Five Woods Brewery right now. And we try to have a speaker, usually like once a month, to come and talk to us about things that are happening in the community. It might be, well, for example, last night we had a meeting and we had a professor of economics come from UTC, talk about her studies. Sometimes we'll have local business leader come talk about their business or nonprofit. So we're engaged in doing our projects in town, but we're also bringing other people in so we can learn about other things that are happening in town as well. So it's a great way to kind of get dialed in. So kind of all that said, like kind of mentioned like how we can fill gaps and fill voids. And that's kind of where I see Rotary is this like really interesting organization, is that you have what the private sector provides, you have what government can typically do. And sometimes in the middle, you'll have nonprofits and different people that'll like try and fill the gaps of need that might exist in our society. And we're so much better than just a box. And so anyway, it's a way that we can kind of identify things and get them done quickly. And while this is a purely Rotary project, I also draw a lot of inspiration from the Strong Towns movement, which is a national organization. And the kind of ethos of Strong Towns is to think about your city, your community, your neighborhood, and what's like this smallest like increment of like positive good you can change in your neighborhood. And for us, when we were thinking about, or for me, like, okay, I care about a lot of things in your built environment, but building a curb, making a sidewalk, that stuff's really kind of difficult to do. But planting a tree seemed like something, the smallest increment of like, we can get a group together, we can plant a tree, and it'll have like both immediate impact and a long-term impact in a very simple measure. So as we were starting to kind of make the idea of doing this project, we kind of, I lived, like, I don't know if I mentioned, I lived in Portland, before moving to Chattanooga, I lived in Portland, Oregon for almost 5 years. And I mentioned the Friends of Tree organization out there, and lived there for 5 years, never once volunteered with them. I don't know how that happened. I have a really good friend I worked with who was a tree captain with them, volunteered with them all the time. And I kind of like secondhand got a lot of the download of how the organization works through him. And their model that I kind of like, well, I guess part of the reason I didn't volunteer with them was I felt in a way that the last thing Portland needed was another dude with a beard and a flannel shirt riding a bike to a tree planting. So I spent my time volunteering with Rotary out there as well. I was a Rotary Youth Exchange student, so drawing on the international aspect of Rotary. So when I moved to Portland, I was like, I want to get back involved with Rotary, and I helped out with Rotary Youth Exchange. So maybe the ultimate hipster, I'm always trying to like be where people aren't. So, but anyway, I think this would be pretty cool to at some point in Chattanooga to do. Like, we'll get the bike trailer out and put some trees in the back, and we'll bike around, throw them in the ground. I think that'd be kind of cool. So, but in anyway, like, as we were thinking about Friends of Trees and what the model would here, we thought, well, probably the easiest thing we could do is identify right-of-ways where there could be trees and there should be trees, but there aren't. And all we got to do is go talk to the city forester, get the species approved, and go do it. But I also kind of felt that the strength of that Friends of Trees model was the way they go is they find someone who wants the tree, is willing to basically adopt it, and care for it. And as part of the process there, they want the tree, Friends of Trees asked them to pay a fee towards the planting. So I felt like that was a $35 fee. So I felt like that was a genius way of fostering a sense of ownership, that it's not an expensive amount of money. It's far from what actually costs to plant a tree, but it's enough, and it's low enough that almost anyone can afford it, but it's enough that someone feels like they're invested in it enough that they don't want it to die. So they're going to water it and mulch it and pull the weeds from around it to keep it going. And so if we plant in the right of way, who's going to take care of it? But if we find someone who wants a tree, and it could be in the right of way, but how do we find someone who wants a tree and is willing to care for it in those first couple of years? In Portland, the difficulty there is that it literally won't rain for 2 months, at least in the summertime, if not 3. So there's no way a tree can survive without that care. Here, we do get summer rains, but you can still go 3 weeks or a month without rain, and then that young tree might not make it or get stressed to the point of not surviving. So, and we don't want to be planting trees that our volunteers work hard to dig, we invest our efforts and money into, and then you go by a year later and it's not there anymore. We want something that's going to prosper, that people are going to go by and see it for years to come, and this thing flourishing and like making long-lasting change. So that's what we decided to go with, was the tree recipient model. We want someone who wants that tree to be their friend, and they're going to whisper soft words of encouragement to it as it grows. So what we did, we decided, okay, well, we need to find people. Like, okay, that's no small task. We got to go out into the world and we got to find someone who wants a tree. When we filled out the grant, we just decided to aim real low. It was like, let's try and do 4 plantings. We'll try and do 3 trees per planting. We'll do like a dozen trees. We'll just kind of figure out how the mechanisms work, and then we'll grow it from there. So we made a flyer and decided the first thing we would do is start targeting neighborhood associations. We thought, if we're going to find people who care about their community and might want a tree, that'd be a good start. If there's not people that attend those meetings who want a tree, they might be able to connect us to people that do. So we did this flyer and started kind of go out into scheduling meetings with neighborhood associations. So first neighborhood association meeting that we went to was Orchard Knob. And they're awesome neighborhood association meeting. Great. There's like huge attendance that goes there. And after that meeting, I get up and I talk about why we need trees and the benefits of it. And I'm talking like, we want to do big like canopy trees that create shade. Not sure how this is going. And then get done with the presentation, the meeting adjourns, and I got 2 people immediately come up to me and they're like, I want a tree. I want a tree. So I'm like, this is fantastic. We went from 0 to 2. I'm like, we skipped 1. It's awesome. I was like hitting the steering wheel on the way home. I was like, all right. So then we went, this is me, this is presenting at Glenwood Neighbor Association meeting. And after that one, had a woman come up and she's like, definitely, I want to meet with you. We want a tree. So went to her, and then went to Ridgedale Neighbor Association meeting. And there we met someone who came forward. She wanted, she's like, I want a tree. And B, I want 5 of your flyers to take home with me and put them in my neighbor's mailboxes, because I think that like our whole row of houses should have trees. That's great. Without even knowing it, we were basically finding champions for the project. We were getting out there and finding people who A, wanted the trees, and B, were willing to kind of even do some of the work for us to go find other people. So this is meeting with Ricky. He was one of the guys that came up to me after the Orchard Knob meeting, and really enthusiastic guy. Was like super excited about his trees. So I met with him and we talk about, okay, we could do a poplar here, and we'll do a sweetback magnolia over there. Good to go. So I think we went and met with Highland Park as well. And so I think all said, we did these meetings and we came away with maybe like 9 or 10 trees, or recipients committed 9 or 10 trees. We wanted to get to that 12 mark. At 12 is like a really low hurdle for the first year. And I thought, well, there's still some areas like we can still like, maybe we should start going a little bit more door knocking. So I took the flyer and did some handwritten notes on there, introduced myself and the project and left my phone number. And I was like, I had a few streets in mind that really needed trees. And it's like, got my daughter in her stroller, got the dog, and of course the dog wanted the right stroller too. So we're like, okay, I think we pretty clearly look like we're not pushing like selling stuff here. Like, we'll go out and like put some flyers in mailboxes, and like if people, it's on a Saturday morning in August and maybe some people are having coffee, I'll hand them a flyer and see how it goes. So I think we did Went out and I didn't get anyone immediately, like in that moment, yes. But within a couple of days, I got an email from someone who lives in Highland Park on 13th Street, a street that I felt like really needed trees. And he's like, man, I'm from Chattanooga. I've lived here, most of his life. And he's like, we need to be planting so many more trees in all of these neighborhoods like Highland Park. We need to be lining the streets up and down with more tree canopy. He's like, how about I want a right-of-way tree for me, one for my neighbor on this side, and one for my neighbor on that side. I want a yard tree for me and a yard tree for my neighbor. He's like, 5 trees total. I'm going to pay for them all, and I'll take care of it. It's like, this is exactly, again, one of the champions we needed. Like, this is what we're talking about. We want to find that enthusiasm. So the species I kind of mentioned earlier, showing those pictures of the inspirational images, what we're really going for are kind of like big, shade tree, canopy trees are going to have that kind of grow for like over 100 years type of thing. So poplar trees, dare I say, are quite popular. We're actually planting like 6 or 7 of those this year. Kentucky coffee tree, sugar maple, different trees, oaks, lindens. We're trying to plant some big trees. So then at this point in the project, so after that flyer expedition, we went from 9 or 10 trees, got Blake on board, had another person that didn't even get a flyer, but a friend of his got a flyer, passed it along to him, another word of mouth referral. One thing led to another, and we got 23 trees. So we doubled. We went from like 12 was the goal to almost double what we aimed for. I had no idea. I was like, okay, well, I hope we get enough people to come out to these plantings to put these things in the ground. But also, we don't need to buy 23 trees. So we had to go back to the Rotary district to say, hey, is there any way we can get more money? A little bit back and forth. We were able to get that resolved. And so we got the money to be able to cover all of the trees and get going. So then the kind of question was, I thought we did the hard part, but it was like, crap, we got logistics to deal with now. Let's get, where are we going to put these trees? We're going to have them delivered. Are we going to, like, for each planting, have them delivered? We're going to end up spending more in delivery costs than we are in the trees themselves. And that'd be a terrible waste of our funds. So I talked with Pete Stewart, the city forester, and worked out an agreement where we can have our trees stored at their yard where they have all their trees stored as well, and Parks Department as well. Then the issue was, okay, well, the truck driver comes, and I found out that the truck driver does not unload the trees themselves. They look for someone else to do it. So thankfully, Pete got his public works crew out there and got a forklift and unload all the trees for us. But then, and this was me like trying to put this whole thing together. So truck comes, delivers the trees, Pete's crew comes out and unloads them. Awesome. We're getting closer. But to even get to this point was a stressful event, because if you remember last fall, we had that just ridiculous drought where it just would not rain. Tree nurseries typically like to dig after it's rained for a little bit to soften up the soil. We had set our planting dates well in advance so we could have them on the calendar and something to target. And as we got closer and closer, the rain was not coming. Fortunately, the nursery I was working with, I was probably the worst client ever. I was like, so painful for them, but they went out, they got a bunch of 5-gallon buckets. They drilled tiny little holes in the bottom so they could put water in there to just have the water seep in around all of our trees to loosen up that soil so they could dig it and get them delivered for us. I mean, they definitely went the extra mile for us and really appreciated that. So once the trees are there, then the issue is, well, now we got to get some of our club volunteers together to load these trees up each time before every planting. So we go on a Friday, and we'll be doing it this Friday, to load up trees and take them to where they're going to get planted the next day on a Saturday. So this is kind of thinking about next year. This is a little bit of a pinch point. If we want to grow this project, we need to kind of sort this issue out a little bit. Would love to hear ideas. So then finally at this point, I think we're pretty geared up and we're kind of good to go for that November, that first planting event. And the last person, this was the first planting event was one where that recipient put flyers in mailboxes. And the last neighbor she had that I went to meet with said that these houses were really recently built and they used to be on a parking lot. And I was like, I'm glad to talk to you. So he said that he's gone out and like tried to put in some raised garden beds, and he put the shovel on the ground, like just beneath the layer of grass, tink, tink, there's asphalt. And I was like, yes, good to talk to you right now. So apart from like the hard pan soils we had because of the drought, we thought one of our club members has access to a skid steer and an auger. And when, again, like this is a great thing about Rotary is you never know who's going to have access to something through their work. And so we were like, yeah, let's just play it safe. Let's get the auger out there and let's see if we run into asphalt. So we got the auger out, we pre-dug a couple of the holes we thought were going to be problematic. And of course, by Murphy's Law, there was no asphalt at all. So it was fine, but the soil was really hard. So it did help out. So anyway, morning of the event comes and we had an absolutely overwhelming turnout. I was asking people, how'd you hear about us? And like, oh, I just Googled volunteer events in Chattanooga this weekend and you guys showed up. Like, man, first event, we've made it. So had a great turnout. The way we structured the events was that while I have an appreciation for trees and I know a little bit enough to be dangerous, let's say even, I'm a landscape architect. I can pick trees for a space to design it, to fit into a design, but to really talk about the nitty gritty and to be able to answer questions you might get from the audience or from volunteers there about the specifics of trees and how they grow and what they need. I was like, I really need an expert for this. And so we got Benjamin Moore from Scenic City Arborist to come, and he would lead a demonstration that shows like step-by-step, like how you put that tree in the ground. And he just like absolutely home run. Like he's just so knowledgeable. I mean, most knowledgeable tree person I know. So it's just such a lift to have him there. And then his wife came and they had their 2 daughters there and they're helping out as well. And yeah, it just was like such a great family environment as well. So then once we do that demonstration planting, we get the volunteers broken out into small groups and we dig the holes and they kind of implement what they just learned from Benjamin about how to put the tree in the ground and what to pay attention to. And we're putting some right-of-way trees in. And if you remember earlier, I showed that slide of Ridgedale. This is where we were planting there on the right-hand side. We put a couple of trees underneath the power lines that were smaller growing trees. Pete approved those, and a couple yard trees out here. So hopefully in years to come, we'll go down Lyerly Street here and see a more beautiful environment. Afterwards, I think if there's one problem of that event, it was the problem you would want to have. We got done too early because we pre-dug some of the holes. We were going to have a cookout afterwards. We had the smoker out there. We're going to like have some chicken and pulled pork. And I think we got done with the planting at like 10:45. So we lost a few people before we could get to the park, but a number of people still stuck around and we had a great time eating and hanging out with some of the volunteers. Yeah, so if that was the one thing to go wrong, we took it. So the December planting event came along, and at this point, the drought was over. It rained. And in fact, it rained on the Friday before, and it rained Friday night, Saturday morning, and it stopped raining before the event started. But that wasn't enough to kind of scare off a few of the volunteers we had scheduled. But we still had plenty good turnout. And one of the things I learned is that when you start attending neighbor association meetings, often there'll be a representative there from the local school. And when we went to Glenwood, there was someone there from Notre Dame High School. So I reached out to him a few weeks before this event and said, hey, maybe some of your students would like to come out and they need to meet some volunteer hours. So it'd be cool. Post it to your, volunteer board. And sure enough, we got, I don't know, maybe half a dozen students came out to participate. So Ben, again, did the demonstration and they, they're arborists, so they have plenty of mulch. So they brought the mulch as well. And we did 3 trees here for Diane. She's in the shirt, white shirt on the left, and she's a great story. She's a Glenwood recipient, and when I went to meet with her, she said that house has been in her family since the early 70s. And it's one time she lived and worked in Atlanta for a while, came home one weekend, probably 20 years ago, and there were some storms or something went through town, and we're knocking over some trees. And she came home one weekend and her dad cut down. They had all these beautiful, big, mature trees around their house. And he got freaked out, got nervous and cut them all down. And she was heartbroken over it. And anyway, 20 years goes by and I show up to one of their neighbors association meetings and she's like, let's try to let's repair this. Let's put some trees in the ground here. I want to try and get some more canopy back. So it's like, you couldn't have drawn up a better script before we did it. I was just really taken by that experience. So there's her house. She's on the left. So we put 2 trees kind of here on the left-hand side, down a tree on the other side of her house on like Derby Street or Kilmer Street. So that was great. And then from there, we went to Ricky. He's one of the guys in Orchard Knob. He was so enthusiastic. We get there, he's got homemade banana bread and some treats for us and lemonade and tea. And he's got his his phone out and he's like got us on Facebook Live and he's streaming the planting for all of his friends to join in. I mean, and then when he like handed the phone to one of our volunteers, he's like, here, walk around and like hold this for him. Like he was doing his own thing. It was awesome. So the students came along as well, and we got these little tree tags designed where we put the species of tree that we plant, and then on the back side it has some simple care instructions about watering and mulching, and it's got a little QR code on there as well that will direct people to our club's Facebook page, so we get some visibility there, so people can also learn about the project through that. So the third recipient of the day was Doris, who I also met at the Orchard Knob meeting, and she told me at that meeting, she's like, you know, had a tree blow over a few years ago in my backyard. I think from talking to her, I kind of figured out there's a hackberry, which if we're judging trees is probably in the lower end of the spectrum. And she's like, would love to, got to get that replaced. I want to have another tree back there. And she's like, these tulip poplars sound cool. Let's do that. I said, great. All right. Well, then at some point in July or August, there was some just like near tornado type storm that came through, and I went by her house at one point and I saw that this immaculate post oak got snapped off mid trunk. And the force of the wind that has to do something like this is pretty remarkable, because an oak tree is the strongest possible tree you can imagine. I just thought to myself, I don't think Doris is going to be on board the tree now. Like, this is kind of probably a pretty traumatic event. And anyway, so I went and talked to her and I was like, hey, so do you still want a tree? And she's like, I'm like, that one blew over there. How are you feeling? She's like, yeah. She's like, I think I need 2 trees now. Again, this is fantastic. This is great. That's the spirit I wanted to hear. So we did a poplar tree in the back where her hackberry blew over. Then we did a single stem sweet bay magnolia in the front, closer to the stump of this poor post oak. And this post oak, I went to Google Street View and I kind of zoomed in. I was showing Benjamin Moore, the arborist. I was showing it to him and he's looking at it and he's like, you know, I think, who knows how long ago, it could have been a decade or more, some branch got pruned on there, probably not quite right, and created a weak spot. And then, you know, the wind blows in the right way and snaps it off. So always, tree care is very important. And it's a good note to try and hire really quality arborists to come take care of things. Okay, there we go. So there's Doris is on the left there in a tie-dye shirt, and we're getting that sweet bag magnolia planted there for us, Ben. So then we took January off and came back in February to plant trees in Highland Park. Now we planted 6 trees there. And here we learned a little bit about logistics as well. Like, we really liked the demonstration concept of having someone talk through the planting, but this was a morning in February where it was like mid-30s and it was kind of damp and the sun wasn't out yet, and it felt 10 degrees colder than that. And volunteers show up and they want to work. They don't necessarily want to watch other people dig a hole. So we lost a few people in the cold of this one, but it still went well. We did a demonstration planting here on Duncan in Highland Park, had a good crew. And then we picked up and we relocated to 13th Street where we planted 5 more trees. And in that move, we lost a few people, but we still had a huge turnout and got these trees planted, no problem. So this is where we went down to where Blake lives on 13th Street. He wanted to do all the right-of-way trees and a couple yard trees as well. And there's Benjamin Moore getting down in there, kind of really showing the details of how you want to plant a tree. We had some volunteers find us from UTC. They're in a fraternity. So that was really cool. It's just fun, like the different people hear about planting and come out. It's just fantastic. Before every planting, we call 811 to get utilities marked, always. But still, we've learned that 811 doesn't get everything. So this planting date, we were digging and some of the volunteers came upon a copper pipe and we're like, okay, done digging. That's as deep as we go. But always call 811, and even then, be very careful. So here's the turn. We had a good turnout, people working here, and a lot of kids running around having fun. Or you can see here, we're doing 3 right-of-way trees and then a couple of yard trees in the background. So that's that image I showed you earlier. We were planting here on the left-hand side. And hopefully some of the neighbors down the street see this and say, hey, I want in on this action. We'll get some trees for them. So hopefully we can work our way down 13th Street and do a little bit more next year. Final planting event, you'll see the date there, March 16th. That is in the future. That is Saturday. So if anybody is interested in coming, we would love to have you there. We're going to be planting, I showed you this image earlier as well. This is in Ridgedale on 13th Street at the Redbud venue. It's an old church. It's been converted into a music venue. It's also where the Ridgedale Neighborhood Association meets in the basement. It's really cool place. And the owner there wants to get some trees planted. We're going to put them kind of out near the sidewalk there and provide some shade. Should be a really nice thing to do. And then after the event, we're going to go back over to Watkins Street Park and grill some food and have a little picnic together. And I'm quite confident that we're going to finish closer to lunchtime this time because we're not going to be pre-augering the holes. So we're going to need some work. We're going to get it done and we're going to go hang out and have a good time. So at this point now we're thinking about next year. We actually kind of already started thinking about next year. We've already applied for and received conditional approval from a Rotary district to get grant funding for next year, our goal. And then we've also applied for a grant from the state of Tennessee. Those two things together, and we're also getting a private donation. We got a private donation last year, and we're increasing that private donation for this year, and we're hoping to kind of grow that arm of funding as well. We'd like to be able to double our trees for next year, get closer to 50 trees. Would be fantastic. We also want to kind of get into new neighborhoods. We'd like to, maybe get into Churchtown, Oak Grove. We'd like to do Southside, some of the streets I showed earlier. I think there's great opportunity to plant trees in Southside, and even go across the river in the North Shore, like Hill City would be a great area to get into. The other idea we're kind of kicking around is that we're like a pretty casual Rotary club. We meet at a brewery in the evening and hang out. And so I think there could be an opportunity as well that we plant some trees in a park setting that there is no recipient, that we kind of become the recipient of our own tree. And we could even, like, in the evening, go out and water. We'll say, hey, for this week's meeting, we're going to go out. We're going to get some 5-gallon buckets, put them in the pickup truck, go out and water the trees. And then afterwards we'll go and do our regular meeting at a nearby restaurant or bar. And I don't know, that sounds pretty cool, I think. Does anybody here be interested in that? I think that'd be pretty cool. And so let's see here. Yeah. So we could go out and do the watering of the tree, but not like that, Yeah, 5-gallon bucket and slowly pour it down there. But because it's not just the young trees we want to care for. It's like, these trees were planted years prior. Get out there, keep weeding and mulching around it, keep them healthy. I think that could be something we could do as a club, or even like on Saturday morning, we get together, get 5-gallon buckets in the truck and go around and take care of some of our trees. Beyond next year, some of the ambitions we have are to perhaps grow this thing into the districts. I mentioned earlier that while up to date, there hasn't been a group that's gone and done regular tree plantings in Chattanooga. That is coming. Probably a lot of you know about the $6 million grant, I think, that came through, it's coming through Green Spaces to do tree plantings, which is fantastic. So there is going to be a robust, big organization in Chattanooga that's going to be doing tree plantings at a scale that dwarfs us, which is great. But there are probably other places, other cities and towns in Tennessee that don't meet the size, that aren't going to have a nonprofit like that that's going to be planting trees. Think about like a Cleveland or a Cookeville or something like that, like South Pittsburgh. They have trees, they have a need for trees, but probably not a robust source to plant them. So we think this could be a model where we draw, again, back to the Rotary structure of having not just our individual club that has its identity and its things it does, but we can draw on a network in our district, like, hey, this is a model for a planting that we can export and like help support the Rotary Club of Cleveland or the Rotary Club of Cookeville, or even getting outside of our district, go to like Johnson City. There could be trees planted in those areas too. Plenty of opportunities like Cookeville, South Pittsburgh, we could be planting trees. Johnson City, we could be planting trees. So kind of wrapping it all up, this has been a lot about trees and a lot about Rotary. And I think that this project really speaks to the kind of ethos, the tagline of Rotary, which is people of action. Moved to Chattanooga, I saw a need, had a club, and we thought, what can we do? There's been a lot of talk about this. There's been a lot of studies about getting more trees here. Let's just do it. So put something together, we acted, and we were just like, get things done. We're doers. We didn't know if it was going to work. We didn't know how the pieces were going to come together. There were moments of, there's moments where we question, is this foolish? Are we going to fail miserably? I don't know how this is going to go. Just kept plowing forward one day at a time. So really, I feel like this is a story about seeing a need in the community, thinking about how it can be done within a structure that can accelerate that process rather than setting up our own profit and like slow down. It's like we can use Rotary as an accelerator to just get to work right away. So anyway, I want to thank you all. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. Thank you all, and I'll take your questions.